to everyone, and what a joy it is having you with us. I'm looking on my chat over here. It's always a blast to see everyone joining us from literally all over the world. It is amazing to me what World Chefs can do in terms of bringing chefs together and bringing chefs together for good and to change the world. And that's what we do here at Feed the Planet. It's all about education and inspiration with the goal of action, with the goal of helping us all do things that are more sustainable and more advantageous for the whole world. So, with that, I'm Chris Ketke, chairman of the Feed the Planet Committee. It is great being with you. Next month, for all of you who will be joining us, and please, I hope everybody will join us because we got some cool stuff next month. But next month, I'm going to also talk about some changes to the Feed the Planet Committee, which are really, really exciting. But that's not why we're here today. We are here today to talk with Chef Chris Bugher, who is there in the mountains of North Carolina. That is the best. Is that really looking out your window? Tell me
It is looking out my window.
Are you? No, come on.
Yeah, it's the best view ever here. It's great.
Anyways, we are here to talk about veganism, interestingly enough, and how that intersects with things with composting and food waste and total product utilization, things that we've talked about before. But there's kind of a neat little twist today because we're going to bring in a discussion of veganism and competition. So before I say any more, let me introduce our guest. So Chris Bugher is a chef instructor at AB Tech in Asheville, North Carolina, in the United States. It is a beautiful part of the United States. The college has degree programs in culinary arts, baking and pastry, as well as certificates in, and we're going to talk about this, therapeutic cuisine and practical meat cutting. Well, that's interesting. Two different sides of that. He's also the owner of Apex Culinary, a consulting and private event company. Chef is a certified executive chef with the American Culinary Federation. And this is where it sort of gets kind of fun here. All right. He was the USA Southeast Chef of the Year in 2017 and recently represented the United States at the World Chefs Global Cup, winning the America's Vegan category, which means you get to go to Singapore and compete in the World Finals. Correct, Chef?
And after watching that video, it got me extra excited. It looks amazing.
Having been in Singapore many times in my life, I have to say it is a cool place. And everything that they say about food is exactly right. So, yes, it's going to be a wonderful eating experience, not to mention, again, seeing everybody. But, Chef, welcome. And we're going to just jump into it because we have a lot to talk about. But before we even get to this whole vegan thing and competition thing, just give us a little background on you. I mean, how did you wind up in this business? What brought you to this point?
So I think I was like a lot of other people of working in restaurants just to pay my bills and to get by. I started working in small restaurants and to pay for college and realized that I loved it. So continued on. I switched to culinary school and I've never looked back since. So I've worked in small restaurants. I've owned catering businesses. I've worked in corporate healthcare, education, and I've loved every aspect of it.
And so then that brought you to where you're working right now, culinary education. I think, by the way, and I'm just going to sort of give a parenthesis here. Sometimes I have people who are chefs who say to me, do you think I should be in culinary education? And I think, Chef, the way you've done it is great, which is you come to culinary education with many different experiences. And I think that's really important when we're teaching our students. So that's super interesting. Now, Chef, if I understand right, we're talking a whole lot today about vegan cooking, and you are not a vegan.
I'm not a vegan all the time.
So you're a vegan part of the time. Go fill us in a little bit on that.
So when the vegan competition was introduced to Wax, In preparation, I started eating vegan because I wanted to totally immerse myself in the food culture of being a vegan. Um, I grew up eating meat. I've gone through phases of being a vegetarian, vegan, meat eater, everything, and so I'll kind of switch back and forth. But I feel it's really important if you're going to be serving vegan food that you need to totally immerse yourself and learn everything you can to please yourself before you can please your customers.
And so you go from meat eating and to taking time to eat vegan. What were your learnings about that? Because, we'll talk about this later, but a lot of chefs, when they hear the word vegan, they kind of shudder. Like, how do I do that? Right? What did you learn when you went into the vegan world?
So really, it's and it doesn't even have to do with being vegan, but having vegetables be the star of a dish. So when I go to a restaurant and look at a menu, I don't look at the proteins. I never have because they're so limited, and it seems every chef has these repetitive proteins, animal proteins, and it doesn't excite me. I look at the side dishes, the appetizers, and it really showcases what that chef can do, their creativity in making those other veg dishes the star of the plate. So that's really how it started was, looking at those side dishes and how to make those exciting. I I never did meal replacement, faux meats, things like that. I just tried to do whole plant-based, having the vegetables be the star and the legumes and everything be the star of the dish.
And so when you were switching over to a vegan cuisine to sort of get your head ready to compete, etc., did you miss eating meat?
Yes and no. Dairy products at first were a big thing. Um, you have those cravings that you've grown up with, and I found a couple ways to capture those cravings for certain things without replacing them with faux meats. For instance, when we made pasta or pizzas, things like that, trying to replicate the sausage flavor. But I didn't want to replicate sausage. So adding red pepper flakes and ground up fennel and using the seasonings that I found in sausages and heavily seasoning the foods with those really gave what I wanted out of the pasta, left me feeling full and satisfied, and I didn't miss it at all.
Very interesting. Just again, a little parenthesis. We had a guest on a couple of years ago who really talked about the kind of menu flip. So, like you, chef, a lot of times when I look at a menu, I start reading from the opposite direction because that's where the side dishes are, and not from duck with whatever. It's always the whatever with duck. And there are some people now who are writing menus that way, which is really exciting. So it starts with roasted carrots, and then it's sort of like, oh, parentheses, some duck or whatever, which I think is a interesting way. So let's jump into this competition. So you decide to compete in the vegan category, and obviously you've done pretty well. And obviously we get to see you in Singapore, and we'll be rooting for you. But what are some tips you've learned in sort of pursuing the vegan competition? Because that's a newer addition to World Chefs. What did you learn? What are some tips you could give to other people, cooks, chefs who are listening right now, who are maybe they are vegan today or vegetarian or want to try sort of more vegan potentially competition? What advice do you give them?
So first off, I think it's a great addition to the competition world. We're definitely moving in the right direction. And when I saw it at first, I wanted to just take it as a challenge. I thought it was very interesting. It was a good move. And looking at it from a competition standpoint, there's no difference. When you're competing, we're looking at good tasting food, beautiful food, proper sanitation, organization, and those are the building blocks of a kitchen. The vegan, vegetarian, meat eating, whatever it is, that comes second. If you have those standards and those building blocks, you're going to create delicious tasting food.
Interesting. And so as you think about this whole, vegan competition within World Chefs, how important do you think it is that we now have that level of competition? Because 10 years ago, that wasn't a thing. What are your thoughts on that?
So, from a sustainability point of view, um, if you've been part of these webinars, you know how important it is to start this swing. Um, reducing greenhouse emissions, increasing farmlands. There's so many aspects that could improve the world by switching more to vegetarian, vegan, and it doesn't have to be total, but every little bit helps. In the past, there's been a lot of competitions where we do the non-edible food, and there's so much waste. It hurts to see. It shows great skill, and I love seeing all that. But to throw it all away at the end of the day, I hate to see that. And then moving away just from every course being meat forward, meat forward, meat forward until you get to the dessert just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think Wax World Chefs has made a great stride to implement the vegan courses in a lot of the competitions. The team competitions now have vegan courses or full vegan programs that they've been implementing. And I think that's a great move. We're heading in the right directions. In the states here, I believe we're a little bit behind the ball. We're trying to implement some of that, but the culture that is here is heavily animal protein oriented. So it can be a little bit more challenging here than the rest of the world. But again, we're pushing and striving to the right direction.
That's really fantastic, and I think that for everybody listening on this webcast today, to let people know within your communities about vegan competition, etc. I think that's yeah, I think it's great. It's a great leadership role for World Chefs, but it's also where the world needs to go. So, Chef, I completely agree. So let's talk a little bit more about sustainability, because you mentioned that you know vegan slash more vegetables and less animal protein is good for our planet, good for sustainability, and something we all should be striving to do more of. And in fact, as you mentioned, it's maybe even more interesting than cooking with meat, which I fully agree with. But a lot of times we'll talk about utilization of the whole animal. And so we're obviously in the vegan world, we're not going to talk about that. But let's talk about utilization of the whole vegetable, the whole fruit. What are your thoughts on that in terms of, and maybe examples of some ways that we can look at, reducing essentially food waste by utilizing more of those vegan products, vegetables, fruits, grains, etc.?
So I think this is a really exciting topic. Something I like to do is to go through my students' compost bins and pull out all the waste that has a use. So, traditionally everybody's peeling their potatoes and carrots into compost and throwing those skins away. So we find use for those by frying them up and making crisp, or frying them and crumbling, adding herbs and having a nice crumb topping. I like to dehydrate a lot of things. So if we have leftover kimchi, cabbage, things like that, that we can incorporate a lot of flavor, then dehydrating them, turning into a seasoning. But it's almost like a mystery basket challenge to go through the compost and see what kind of uses can I use for this. Why are you throwing away the seeds of all these fruits that are laying around when you could roast them and have them as a nice crunchy topping? It tends to be garnishes, a lot of garnishment that you can get from a compost bin or that would normally go into the trash.
So would it be safe to say, I mean, that I remember growing up as a young cook, and again, that's now a long time ago. But there was always that saying in the kitchen that the more experienced cooks, they get to work with the expensive stuff like meat and fish, and people would always be like, scrape the fish bones and get every little bit of fish off there, but thought nothing of throwing away, ends, roots, peels of vegetables, So are you saying that now needs to that we need to change that way of thinking?
Absolutely. And even not just in the kitchen, but harvesting. So, another great example are sweet potatoes. So, sweet potatoes are a huge crop in North Carolina where I'm, and the leaves are not used at all. Oftentimes, they're left into the field, thrown into hopefully compost and used for fertilizer, but they make an amazing braise. They are good in different sauces if you want to make a chermoula or chimichurri or pesto, grind them up with some sort of acid and herbs. They could be used in salads. There's just so many uses, and that's just one example of a sweet potato. But all the other plants, most plants have edible leaves that could be used in the process in the kitchen.
So wait a minute. Are you telling me sweet potato leaves are edible?
Sweet potato leaves are great. Yes,
I've been cooking for like, I don't know, darn near 40 years now, and I've never heard that before. Oh my goodness. But then again, we never see them in the market either.
exactly.
That's super interesting. Oh, I mean, this reminds me of like some of the past guests we've had like on from places like India, and they're talking about all the different herbs that they have and plants that they have, um, indigenous things that. Anyways, this is super interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the business case for doing this. So let's put your business hat on for a little bit. I mean, you have your other company that is not teaching, so you're in the world of profit. You have to make your business work. um how do vegan dishes fit into that? Is it, we've had some people say, yeah, it's a lot. You save a lot of money on food costs, but then your labor cost goes up. And so at the end of the day, I don't know if it's actually a good business proposition or not. But what are your experiences from the business side? And also, add to that, what's the reception? Because you mentioned in the United States, we tend to be meat focused, animal protein focused. What's the response you're getting?
So there's a couple different ways you can go about this. Um, Advertising as a vegan restaurant or a vegan concept, you can have a market for it, depending on where you are. So a lot of the places in the world and different places in the States, there is that vegan market. What I've found where I am, there is somewhat of a vegan market, but I've found that you don't have to advertise that. What I do is I advertise some delicious food. So I recently had a pop-up restaurant I ran for one night, and one of my features were jackfruit empanadas. So it was a comfortable dish. My guests didn't know what jackfruit was, so I had a lot of questions being asked. But their thought of an empanada was this meat-filled pastry that might have been fried or baked with a delicious sauce. And I took pictures of it. I posted it. They saw them there. They saw other guests ordering them, and everybody was intrigued. And it ended up being my number one seller of the night. I had a lot of customers come up afterwards and say, "What meat was that? I've never heard of that." And I told them there was no meat, no fat. I used coconut oil in the crust. I talked to them about jackfruit and how I smoked the jackfruit to kind of give that umami, savory flavor that they wanted from the meat. And I've really found that's a big one. Adding tomato, smoking products really gives that meat forward umami thing that you may be looking for or missing. Um, and they loved them. They ordered extra. Again, I didn't say they were vegan on my dish. I did have a little V for people who were expecting that, looking for it, but majority of my customers did not know before they ordered them.
So at
So
the end of the day, like everything, taste is king, right?
absolutely, and smell and looking at beautiful food, it goes a long way.
So maybe one of the big takeaways here is, if and hopefully you're, in your restaurants, in your hotels, in your pop-ups, you are working on trying to incorporate more vegetables and more vegetable centric dishes and more vegan dishes. Um, but one of the big takeaways, I think, is make it taste great, obviously, but don't call it out as here's a vegan dish. Is that correct? I mean, do you think if you
Yeah,
had if you had said, "Hey, this is the vegan dish of the night," do you think you would have sold as many?
absolutely not. Not here, at least. Again, depending on your market, but and even in a market, depending on your location. This particular one was at a brewery, so the crowd was generally meat, animal protein heavy. Um, but again, I didn't advertise it as vegan, advertised it as good food, and it sold really well.
Very interesting. All right, so let's talk a little bit about where you teach. Um, and you teach a pretty unusual, I've never heard of it, an unusual certificate in therapeutic cooking, therapeutic
So
food.
Therapeutic Cuisine is our newest certificate program. And what we were looking at, I'd worked in corporate health care for a couple years, and there was a lot of dietitians, and they had these prescribed diets that they were giving to their patients. And the cooks and the chefs in the kitchens didn't really know a lot about them. So we wanted to bridge that gap. So by teaching our students what are these prescribed diets, what are these lifestyle diets, it doesn't have to be a prescribed diet. Um, how to make those taste good and understand them, and so it gives them just another avenue to take in our industry, another pathway.
And you guys, and you mentioned earlier you teach and practice composting.
Yes, actually, we have several different things. We have composting that a farm comes and picks up. So any waste, they'll come at the end of the week and pick up all our compost. It's free of charge. And then I also have a machine in my kitchen made by Vitamix. That's a composter, which I really love. I start my day and finish the day by composting. So it's a small chamber, about 2 liters. You put all your scraps in it and you push start, and it dries it, grinds it in about 4 to 6 hours. And you're left over with this dehydrated compost that you can fold into your soil. And it's a great system. And it's gotten my students to think about that. And now that's how they start their day. They start filling it up for me, or they'll empty it out and refill it. So just starting that trend is really helpful.
And so what's the response of your students, when you mention vegan cooking?
So a lot of them here are kind of scared of it. Uh, Again, they grew up eating a lot of animal proteins. So I try to incorporate it into classroom mystery baskets, daily specials. So we run a restaurant at the college here also. And so we'll have a daily special every time we run the restaurant. And it's either vegetarian or vegan forward, 9 out of 10 times. And so I'll present my students with a cart of ingredients. Maybe they're leftover ingredients from our storeroom. Um, and they'll ask me, well, where's the protein? And I say, there's protein on this cart. It's just not animal protein. So then we have a one-on-one discussion of what kind of dish can they create with this? How do you make it delicious? What kind of texture can you add? How do you fulfill your complementary and all your amino acids? And it's a good conversation, and it forces them to cook vegetarian or vegan. And I think they learn a lot from that.
That's awesome. All right. We have a bunch of questions that have been coming in. So, here we go. Now, of course, they're all coming in. um, here we go. What is your go-to plant-based protein?
So I like legumes a lot. They have a lot of protein in them, and you can do a lot with them. So if we're talking about chickpeas or garbanzo beans, you can puree them, and they have a nice texture for a sauce. You can use the liquid, the aquafaba, if they're canned, for meringues. You can dehydrate them and grind them to make a flour. They're so versatile, and not just chickpeas, but lentils or any kind of legumes. Those are really nice as a base. Again, I love sweet potatoes. It's local here. They have a lot of flavor. You can they add a nice sweetness, but earthiness. I don't even know. It's whatever's in season and I can get my hands on is the star of the dish.
Cool. All right, next. Are peels, this is an interesting, this is a two-part question. Are peels of potatoes and other vegetables safe in terms of pesticides and the other stuff agriculture puts on them? That's question one.
So yes and no. With anything, I'd like to buy organic or locally, and then you don't have to worry about that. But if you are using a mass ordering company and you're worried about GMO or pesticides or anything, well, number one, you should be washing all your fruits and vegetables anyway. Through harvesting, transportation, they're going to fall on the floor. They're going to get dirty. So that's the first step in it. You can also buy vegetable washes and everything. But if you scrub them and clean them, yes, they're perfectly safe and healthy, nutritious. A lot of the nutrients are on the outside in the skin. They're more nutrient dense towards the surface.
All right. And there was a second part of the question that just disappeared here, but I love so and it basically was going back to that question of labor cost versus food waste, and how do you weigh that from a business perspective?
Well, I always challenge people to do it faster, and I race them. So if we're peeling potatoes, uh, I'll show them how to do one, and then I'll race them in 10. And it's a fun way to get your employees or your students to work a little bit faster. Um, and you take a little bit of that away. Yes, there's always that convenience factor of buying something pre-made or pre-cut or anything. But sometimes you lose quality over that, and it has its place, and it just depends on what market you're in.
All right, I'm going to ask you a bunch of really fast questions here. Here we go. How can we? It's probably not a fast question, but we're running out of time. How can we promote more vegan varieties in restaurants? Or I guess more veganism in restaurants.
Again, make delicious tasting food that may be recognizable as another dish, and they can order that, and then they'll be like, "Wow, it's vegan. I never knew that."
All right. Let's see here. I want to get. Oh boy, there's a lot of good ones here. All right, I'm just going to read it. There's a couple ideas here that people are tossing out, which I just wanted to share with everyone. In this one chef here is, in our kitchen we use rinds of pineapple, watermelon, and melons for pickles, chutneys, and jams, which is super cool. And then they go on to say, and I make papaya seed pepper for vegan food preparation. What's your opinion? Is this a healthy thing to do?
Yes. If you've ever had papaya seeds, you can dry them out and grind them. It's a great pepper alternative. It is slightly different, but yeah, they work great.
All right, let's see. Blah, 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 blah. So there's an interesting question here, and maybe there's not an answer to this exactly, but essentially it's so when we're talking about sustainability in culinary, it's most focused on plants, vegetarian, and vegan. Does this mean that animal protein usage is an issue for sustainability, while plants are the best alternative? So why don't people just get rid of meat entirely? Good luck with that.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, the world's been raised on animal proteins. Again, where I'm not 100% vegan, I do eat animal proteins, and I support especially humanely raised and farmed animal proteins. It's great to find local farmers. Some of the mass production thing is horrible, but something like goat is one of the number one consumed animal proteins in the world. In the States, it's really hard to find. They take up less land mass, less water, everything. So even not just vegan, but there's other alternatives to the mass produced animal proteins also.
All right, really fast. Are there any cooking techniques you use in vegan cooking that are particularly useful?
So one I've found is caper juice. Whenever I'm making cheeses, vegan cheeses and things like that, if you would like a feta cheese, a lot of times people will try to make a feta, or what you're looking for is that briny salinity aspect. And I've found adding caper juice really can brighten up that dish and add that kind of saline flavor. So that oyster flavor, that oceany flavor. that's more of a fresh brightness. So that's a really cool one that I've found.
Interesting. All right. Do you use plantain skins at all? And I have the comment here is I use the yellow ones to make some dishes.
I have not. I've heard some uses. They're great for composting and for plants. You could soak them in water and kind of take some of the potassium out. And I've heard a lot of good uses for the peels, but I have not used them directly. But I would love to try some.
All right.
It's one of my
There
favorite
are
things.
more there are more questions, but we need to wrap this up since we're already over time. There was one that came in about desserts and veganism and Isla, who's sitting there in Paris pulling all the levers and making this all happen. Make a note that maybe we should look at that in the future, something with desserts and veganism and all of that. That could be very interesting. So with that, we do need to wrap it up. I want to say thank you to all the people all over the world who took 30 minutes out of your day to be with us today. We are grateful for that. I hope what you have heard and learned today will inspire you to do and to do things maybe more vegetarian, vegan, and think about that. And we'd love to hear about what you do and what this inspires you to think about. Chef, a million thank yous. You have your students who are waiting for you to get back to class. So we're not going to keep you any longer, but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And Isla, of course, and Lynn in Paris, you guys are great and you make this all happen. So with that, I will say, Chef, have a lovely day. And to the rest of you as well, have a great rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whatever it may be. And we'll see you next month. Don't forget 2024 to join us in Singapore, because that is going to be an amazing time. And then we can all talk in person. Thank you.
Thank you.